The tragedy that's unfolding in the Gulf today is not the first horror movie that we have seen. Just 4.5 years ago, Katrina and then Rita washed up on the shores of the Gulf Coast, and the levees broke, putting a major metropolitan area and an entire region of the country, brought it almost to its knees. The tragedy that's unfolding on the Gulf in fast motion is actually a replay of something that our delegation and other delegations of the Gulf Coast have been trying to express and share and show for the last 20 years or more. The real horror story is this graph, 100 years of land change for coastal Louisiana. Nowhere in America is there an ecosystem or an ecosystem more threatened. Nowhere in America was it actually more preventable. And nowhere in America are there actually resources very close to this source that could fix it. Now, unfortunately, nothing can be fixed in the next 24 hours or week or 3 weeks. But if we take the right action today and in the few weeks and months ahead, this vital coast can be restored not only for the 2 million people or more that call it home, but for the 350 million people in the United States of America and, frankly, billions of people around the world that depend on it to function in a healthy, sustainable, and vibrant way. I have held up this chart on any number of occasions to show the areas of land loss just from 1932 to 2000. In the red, the projected land loss from 2000 to 250 in the yellow. But to put this in some very specific language, in one weekend, 4.5 years ago, this Gulf Coast lost 214 square miles when Katrina ravaged this shore. And now, 50 miles from the mouth of the Mississippi River, right off of Plaquemines Coast, there is another horror story unfolding. 4 months ago to this date, the Deep Horizon well, 5,000 plus feet below sea level, blew up. It has yet to be contained. BP and the industry and the government are putting all of the engineering and technological resources they have available to them to cap this well. But so far, it has not been completely successful. There have been some hopeful steps that have been taken in terms of the riser siphoning, that is removing thousands of gallons of oil, which is hopeful. But until this well is completely stopped, this horror movie is going, unfortunately, to continue. But there are solutions. There are immediate solutions, there are medium solutions, and there are, in fact, long-term solutions. I want to also show come back to that in a minute. It's over here. I've also held up this chart over 100 times on the floor. This will show the infrastructure of the oil and gas industry off the coast of Louisiana. This industry didn't start a month ago. It didn't start a year ago. It didn't start 10 years ago. It didn't start 20 years ago. It started almost 50 years ago when the first well was drilled off of Creole, Louisiana, in southwest Louisiana. At that time, President Truman suggested, as this industry began, that the states that were hosting this industry should share as equals partners with the federal government to make sure that this industry develops safely, both from an environmental perspective and in terms of a partnership for production to produce the oil and gas necessary for this country. His appeals were rejected by some local officials, sadly and unfortunately, and were ultimately rejected by the federal courts through a long, protracted battle, which is part of the historical record. About 25 years ago, our delegation dusted off those documents and decided that we should ask once again to explain to the country how vital these resources are, how important it is for the Gulf Coast states and any coastal states that are at risk, whether they actually drill or not. You can see Florida is not allowing drilling, but they're still very much at risk. And our initial proposal was that all the Gulf Coast states would share in 37.5% of these revenues, which is what the interior states since 1933 have been able to share until this day. So I'm here once again to say this is what this infrastructure in graph form looks like in real life. This is Port Fourchon. This is what Port Fourchon looked like when Hurricane Katrina hit. It looks like this, sometimes not quite this bad, not quite this flooded, even in a heavy rain, because the federal government has grossly failed time and time again, decade in and decade out, to protect this coast, to invest in coastal energy infrastructure so vital for the nation, and as a result, a healthy marsh, which should be a whole poster of solid green, looks in large measure like this: a fragile coast under attack from years of mismanagement and underinvestment, and now from the oil itself. There's more oil being spilled or uncontrollably flowing into the Gulf in 1 day and a half than has flowed into the entire Gulf for the last decade. Just to put this situation in perspective, 7,000 barrels of oil in the last decade have been released into the Gulf from non-hurricane related spills off of rigs. 7,000 gallons or barrels at a minimum, because that number is still to be debated, at a minimum is being flowed into the Gulf of Mexico every day and a half, to put this disaster in perspective. Yes, the regulations failed. Yes, the safeguards failed. But what has remained true through it all is that this is one of the most productive and profitable coasts in America that have been grossly shortchanged by the federal government and let down by many in the industry, not all, many in the industry, in the oil and gas industry for years, and that has got to change. And so I am asking again for a package of support and relief, and in the spirit of our Congress, and because of the pressing need for fiscal restraint, I want to start with the pieces of this package that I'm going to be asking for on behalf of Louisiana and the Gulf Coast states, with the things that don't cost any money or cost a minimal amount of money, but would make a tremendous amount of sense to get done right now. First, let me say I'm grateful for the President's package of relief that is equivalent to about $140 million in a variety of different ways. I support his efforts to reform minerals management and to divide the agency, which is long overdue, into 3 distinct groups, one of which will be focused on rules and regulations so that this can never happen again. But I have a few things that I want to add to that package. And again, I'm going to start with those things that make cost little to no funding. First, to provide immediate interest relief up to $15,000 to the more than 12,000 Gulf Coast small businesses that currently have loans out from the last disaster, and to provide for them basically 3 years of no interest payments, which will reduce their monthly payments significantly as they balance and recalibrate to face this disaster that's unfolding today. The SBA would be required to prioritize applications for businesses with 50 employees or less and businesses impacted by the oil spill, and there's money in the budget. No new money is required. I'm pleased to have the support of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the New York Times, and other distinguished organizations in support of this effort. New loan deferrals. When the Small Business Administration makes new loans to either hotel owners, restaurant owners, marine boat captains, oystermen, shrimpers, we're asking the SBA to use as collateral not the boats that are now imprisoned in the harbor, not the houses that are yet to be rebuilt since Katrina, not their personal property, but the actual claim against BP, to use that as collateral so that these loans are technically loans, but they act more as an advance to businesses until BP can pay the full tab that's owed under the law. It would take some creativity. It'll take some change in administrative rules, but it won't cost the federal government any money. Third, expedite CAP grants, Coastal Impact Assistance Programs. In one of the last energy bills, I was able to secure $1 billion for the Gulf Coast, kind of like a down payment to make up for the 50 years of neglect. It wouldn't quite make it up, but it was what Congress did generously. I'm grateful. Only 20% of that money has been expended to date. I'm asking for the other 80% to be released as soon as possible for the states of Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. Again, that money is already appropriated. And there are two others, and then I'll get back to the main one. The President has smartly invested $19 million in the upcoming budget to accelerate some of the Louisiana coastal assistance programs, part of the overall plan to restore and protect and strengthen this coast. It's one of the few new starts in the country. We're very grateful that this administration has actually put money not just behind study but construction. I'm asking for that $19 million to be accelerated in the supplemental appropriation. Again, it's already been budgeted in this upcoming year, but we would just accelerate it, and we'll get any number of projects started and underway. Then finally, beneficial use of dredge material. Again, this costs the Corps of Engineers nothing. It's an administrative change that will allow them to use dredge materials to build either the barrier islands that the state is requesting. Whether that gets approved or not, we don't know. But to use dredge materials in a smart way to block some of the inland passes so that the oil can be, if not stopped, it will go on to the sand, but it's a lot easier to clean up than when it actually gets into the marsh and then flows deep into the grasses of the wetlands. And then finally, but most importantly, and this will, moving forward, cost the federal government some funding, but it's a very good investment. Because the fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, we're either going to have to pay this now or pay twice or 3 times as much later. We saw the same thing in Katrina. Had we invested $1 billion at a minimum in maintaining a levee system, we would have prevented the cost associated almost up to $200 billion today. I want to repeat that. Had the federal government invested about $1 billion to keep a levee system from failing, we would have saved about $200 billion that it's cost the federal government, insurance companies, and individuals to rebuild a major metropolitan area. I don't think I have to be any clearer about the importance of investing in the front end. And so the RESPOND Act, which I'm introducing today, Restoring Ecosystem Sustainability and Protection of the Delta, that act would accelerate the Domenici-Landrieu Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act, which we passed in 2006. It will dedicate 37.5% of royalties based on that formula, which was negotiated between all of the Gulf Coast states, to make that effective today. Now, just to be clear, there are two planning areas in the Gulf. The lines are not there, but there's a western planning area, a central planning area, and Tom, why don't you come show where the eastern planning area is. There's very little drilling being done, as you can see, in the eastern planning district, and that's going to be debated as we move forward. But there's a tremendous amount of drilling being done both close to shore and quite a distance offshore in shallow and in deep water, being done in the western Gulf and in the central Gulf. My bill would say that all new wells since 2006, which is when this bill was passed, not going back the 50 years, which I believe would actually be fair, but fiscally that would be very difficult to do. But moving forward, being mindful that these revenues are needed by the federal government, but they're also needed by these states along the Gulf, moving forward from 2006, we would accelerate the revenue sharing to begin immediately. It would be about a $3 billion cost over the next 10 years, but again, it would be a very smart $3 billion investment to shore up this wetlands, to prevent it from looking like this, which is where 18% of the offshore oil and gas revenues come. This is Port Fourchon. It would prevent it from looking like this because there would actually be an elevated highway which could be built, barrier islands which could be secured, marshes that could be restored to protect this and other infrastructure along this Gulf. And let me just say finally, and then I'll take questions. I said to Secretary Salazar the other day that the President could not have appointed a man with more integrity and in many ways expertise to deal with this issue. When he served in the Senate, he was noted as a very balanced senator between the needs of industry and the environment. He served before he was a senator and secretary as an attorney general, so he most certainly has the passions to fight for the people and to bring justice to individuals. As an attorney general, he's demonstrated that. He couldn't be in a better position. Our country needs him. I told him that if there was ever an excuse for this administration that has not been that supportive, as you all know, of oil and gas overall, they have been very reluctant to move forward. If there was ever a time where they could have literally run out the back door and said, shut down all domestic drilling, this could have been it. But to their credit, they didn't, because they know what I know. America today uses 20 million barrels of oil a day. We are producing less than 10. If we don't produce it off of our shores, whose shores will we produce it off of? And what are the risks associated, the tremendous economic risk and national security risk relative to importing 100% of our oil from other places that don't share our values, as opposed to the 60% or 65% that we're importing today? So the answer is not to run and hide. The answer is to fight smartly with better tools, to make sure that regulations are in place and followed and inspectors are trained and paid well enough to be able to do this work, that this never happens again, to pause where appropriate to review all safety measures, and then, just like after the shuttle, the Challenger blew up, we found out what happened and we reinstituted our space program and now are operating it much more safely. That is what we have to do today. So while the federal government has not done everything perfectly, I think that the fact that they are standing their ground saying we must get this technology right, we must reorganize ourselves, we must do a better job in regulation, but we have to move forward producing the energy that this country needs, at least for the next 10 or 20 years, until we can all operate off of wind, solar, or hydro, or some combination. And one more point. Not only is there a lot of oil off of this shore, but there's a lot of natural gas. And people from Boone Pickens to others are arguing correctly that if more natural gas is used, 50% of our greenhouse gases can be reduced. So we need the gas as well as the oil that comes from off of this shore. But right now, the people of Louisiana and the Gulf Coast need this country to act and respond, accelerate revenue sharing now, bolster the president's aid package, and do some things that actually don't cost anything in terms of new money, but could have an immediate impact on helping the livelihoods of many businesses along this coast survive the next couple of weeks or months or potentially even years. We just don't know what the long-term impacts are going to be.